James, a successful businessman known for his sharp acumen and composed demeanor, decided to stop by a quaint restaurant he had recently acquired as part of a new venture. Dressed casually in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, he walked into the warmly lit dining room, where the air was filled with the aroma of freshly prepared dishes and soft chatter from patrons. As James stepped in, he noticed a few heads turn, but the initial attention quickly faded as if he were invisible. He chose a small table in the corner, away from the main crowd, and waited patiently for someone to bring him a menu. The restaurant wasn't particularly busy. Servers moved briskly between tables, their hands full of plates and drinks, occasionally stopping to exchange smiles or polite words with customers. Yet no one seemed to notice him. 5 minutes passed, then 10. James sat calmly, his hands folded on the table, observing the scene around him. A group of diners who had arrived after him were promptly greeted, their orders taken with cheerful efficiency. He caught the eye of one of the waitresses, a tall blonde woman named Susan, and raised a polite hand to get her attention. She hesitated for a moment, her expression a mix of annoyance and reluctance, before slowly walking over. When she finally approached his table, her tone was curt and devoid of warmth. "What do you need?" she asked, barely making eye contact. "Just the menu, please," James replied evenly, his calm demeanor betraying none of the irritation he might have felt. Susan sighed audibly, turned on her heel, and walked away. Moments later, she returned and unceremoniously dropped the menu on the table, the laminated pages landing with a soft thud. "Anything else?" she asked, her tone dripping with impatience. James looked up at her, maintaining his composure. "Not yet, thank you," he said with a small nod. Without another word, she walked away, muttering something under her breath. As James opened the menu, he couldn't help but notice the whispers and side glances from nearby diners. A few chuckled quietly, seemingly amused by the way he was being treated. Despite the undercurrent of tension, James remained unfazed, his expression calm as he scanned the menu and waited for Susan to return. When she finally came back to take his order, her attitude hadn't improved. She stood with one hand on her hip, tapping her foot lightly against the floor. "Well, have you decided, or should I come back later?" she asked, her voice laced with impatience. James gave her his order, a simple meal and a glass of water. Susan jotted it down quickly and left without a word, her pen clicking shut as she moved on to the next table with a markedly different attitude. Her smile returned when she greeted other patrons, her tone bright and accommodating. As James waited for his food, the subtle yet palpable coldness of the restaurant's staff lingered in the air. It was clear they had judged him based on his appearance, and their unprofessional behavior only reinforced their assumptions. James, however, knew better than to react impulsively. He had faced situations like this before, and patience, he had learned, often yielded the most unexpected results. This detailed introduction sets the stage for the story's unfolding drama while highlighting James's quiet strength and the unprofessional behavior of the restaurant staff. It builds anticipation for the twist to come. James sat quietly as he waited for his food. Around him, the restaurant bustled with activity, but the contrast in how other diners were treated compared to him was striking. Waitresses darted from table to table, their smiles warm and their voices cheerful. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed, and plates of steaming food were served with finesse. But James's table seemed to exist in an invisible bubble, one of deliberate neglect. His patience remained steady, though he was acutely aware of every sidelong glance and muffled whisper directed his way. He wasn't unfamiliar with such treatment, and though it didn't surprise him, it never ceased to disappoint. Finally, Susan returned, holding his plate in one hand and a glass of water in the other. She set them down with a clatter, barely glancing at him. "There you go," she said flatly, already turning to leave. James looked down at the food. The edges of his steak were dried out, and the vegetables were limp and cold. The glass of water had fingerprints smudged along its rim. It was as if no effort had been made at all. "Excuse me," James called after her calmly, his voice cutting through the hum of the room. Susan turned back, visibly annoyed. "What now?" she said, exasperation written all over her face. James gestured to the plate. "The food is cold," he said evenly. "Could you ask the kitchen to reheat it, please?" She huffed, crossing her arms. "It's fine, that's how it comes." "I don't think that's the case," James replied, still composed. "I'd appreciate it if you could address this with the kitchen." Susan rolled her eyes and grabbed the plate, muttering something inaudible as she walked away. A few nearby patrons chuckled, seemingly entertained by the interaction. Minutes passed, and when Susan returned, the food wasn't much better. It was clear her effort had been minimal, and her expression dared him to complain again. James, however, said nothing this time. Instead, he picked up his fork and knife and began eating, his face a mask of calm. As James finished his meal, he decided to address the situation directly. He walked to the front desk and asked to speak with the manager. A tall man in his late 30s with a neat suit and an air of authority approached him. His name tag read Richard. "Is there a problem?" the manager asked, his tone professional but cold. "There is," James said. "I've noticed a significant difference in the way I was treated compared to other diners. The service was slow, the food was poorly prepared, and the attitude of the staff was less than professional." Richard sighed, clearly uninterested in the complaint. "I'm sorry if your experience wasn't up to your expectations," he said dismissively. "But we're busy, and the staff is doing the best they can." James raised an eyebrow. "I see. And is it standard for your staff to ignore certain customers while providing exceptional service to others?" Richard's demeanor shifted, irritation flashing across his face. "Look, if you're unhappy, there are plenty of other restaurants in the area. Maybe try one of those next time." James paused for a moment, letting the words hang in the air. Then, with a small smile, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black card. He handed it to Richard. The manager frowned, glancing at the card before his face went pale. It was a business card, embossed with gold letters that read, "James Harrison, owner, Harrison Group Restaurants." James's calm voice broke the silence. "I'll be conducting a review of this location starting tomorrow. You and your team will have the opportunity to explain your actions during a staff meeting." Richard's mouth opened and closed as he tried to form words. "Mr. Harrison, I didn't know." James nodded, slipping the card back into his pocket. "That's clear. Perhaps it's time to implement some changes here. I expect to see every employee at the meeting. I trust you'll let them know." Richard stammered a response, but James had already turned and walked out the door, leaving the stunned manager and staff behind. This section builds tension by showing how James calmly confronts the staff's poor behavior, even as they continue to dismiss him. The twist with the business card serves as the moment of realization, setting the stage for the resolution in the next part. The next morning, the atmosphere at the restaurant was tense. Employees gathered in the dining area before opening hours, whispering nervously amongst themselves. The news of James's true identity had spread like wildfire. Susan stood off to the side, her arms crossed, her usual confidence replaced with visible unease. Richard, the manager, paced near the counter, his face flushed as he glanced repeatedly at the clock. At precisely 9 a.m., the door opened and James walked in. Dressed sharply in a tailored navy suit, he carried himself with the same quiet confidence that had unsettled them the day before. He paused briefly at the entrance, surveying the room before making his way to the center. The murmurs among the staff died instantly. James didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When he spoke, the weight of his words filled the room. "Good morning," he began. "I'm James Harrison, the new owner of this restaurant. Yesterday, I came here as a customer, but what I experienced was far from what I expect from my establishments." He looked directly at Susan, then shifted his gaze to Richard, his tone steady but firm. "What I saw was indifference, neglect, and an unacceptable attitude toward guests. This isn't just bad business, it's a failure of basic respect." Susan's face turned bright red. She opened her mouth to say something, but thought better of it. Richard cleared his throat, attempting to explain. "Mr. Harrison, I can assure you this isn't typical." James held up a hand, silencing him. "Richard, I appreciate that you're trying to defend your team, but yesterday was not an isolated incident. I observed a pattern. Some guests were treated with care and attention, while others, including myself, were ignored or outright disrespected. This is a systemic issue, and it falls on leadership to set the tone." Richard's shoulders slumped, and he looked down, realizing there was... James turned his attention back to the group. "Let me make one thing clear. Every guest who walks through those doors deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter who they are, what they look like, or what you assume about them. That is non-negotiable." He walked slowly through the room, meeting the eyes of each employee. This restaurant will be known for its excellence, not just in food but in service. If anyone feels they cannot uphold those standards, this is your opportunity to leave. No hard feelings. A heavy silence hung over the room. Finally, one of the younger waiters hesitantly raised his hand. "Mr. Harrison, I want to apologize. I didn't say anything yesterday, but I saw what was happening, and I didn't step in. I can do better." James gave him a nod of approval. "Acknowledging where we fall short is the first step. Thank you for your honesty." Susan shifted uncomfortably, her arms tightening across her chest. "Mr. Harrison," she began hesitantly, I didn't know who you were." James's gaze landed on her. "And why should that matter? Your job is to serve every guest with the same level of care and respect regardless of who they are. Do you believe you did that yesterday?" Susan swallowed hard and looked down. "No, sir, I didn't." James paused, letting the moment sink in. "Susan, you'll be placed on probation. You'll receive additional training, and your performance will be closely monitored. If you can't demonstrate improvement, this won't be the right place for you." Susan nodded meekly, her earlier defiance now completely gone. Turning back to the group, James continued, "We're implementing a training program to ensure every member of this team understands what exceptional service looks like. I'll also be spending time here over the next few weeks to oversee the changes." He straightened, his tone softening slightly. "This isn't just about following rules, it's about creating an environment where every guest feels welcome and valued. That's the kind of place people want to return to, and when we achieve that, this restaurant will thrive, not just for me, but for all of you." The staff nodded, a mix of relief and determination crossing their faces. Richard stepped forward, looking humbled. "Mr. Harrison, I'll do everything I can to make this right." "I'll hold you to that," James replied. "Remember, leadership starts with accountability." Over the following weeks, the restaurant underwent a remarkable transformation. New policies were implemented to ensure consistent service, and the entire team participated in intensive training sessions. Susan, though initially resistant, began to change. With coaching and guidance, she started to understand the importance of her role and how her attitude affected not only guests but the entire team. James made frequent visits, observing quietly and occasionally stepping in to offer advice or encouragement. His presence became a motivating force for the staff, who began to take pride in their work. Soon, the restaurant's reputation began to shift. Guests noticed the improved service and welcoming atmosphere. Positive reviews started pouring in, and business flourished. Months later, James returned to the restaurant as a guest. This time, he was greeted warmly by Susan, who had become one of the most attentive and professional members of the team. She led him to a prime table, her demeanor respectful and friendly. "Welcome back, Mr. Harrison," she said with a genuine smile. "It's a pleasure to serve you." James nodded, satisfied. "It's good to be here. You've come a long way, Susan. Keep it up." As he enjoyed his meal, James watched the staff moving efficiently and cheerfully through the room. The transformation was complete, and the restaurant now stood as a testament to the power of accountability, respect, and leadership. Months had passed since James Harrison implemented sweeping changes in the restaurant. The establishment was no longer the tense, cold place he had encountered on his first visit. Instead, it had transformed into a welcoming hub, known for its exceptional service and quality. Regular patrons praised the staff's professionalism, and new customers were flocking in after hearing glowing recommendations. James had deliberately stepped back from daily oversight, trusting Richard and the team to maintain the new standards. But today, he decided to return unannounced to see firsthand how the restaurant was doing. James entered the restaurant on a bustling Friday evening. The dining area was nearly full, the sound of cheerful conversations and the clinking of silverware filling the air. The decor, subtly refreshed to match the restaurant's elevated standards, now exuded warmth and charm. As James approached the host stand, a young woman greeted him with a bright smile. "Good evening. Welcome to the corner table. Do you have a reservation?" "I don't," James replied with a smile. "Is there a table available?" "One moment, sir," she said, scanning the seating chart. "Ah, yes, we have a lovely table near the window. Would that work for you?" "That sounds perfect," James said. The hostess led him to his seat, pulling the chair out for him and handing over a menu. Your server will be with you shortly. Please enjoy your evening." Moments later, a familiar figure approached his table. It was Susan, the waitress whose attitude had sparked the chain of events months ago. Gone was the indifference and irritation she had once worn like armor. She now moved with confidence and grace, her expression warm and inviting. "Good evening, sir," she began. "Welcome to the corner table. My name is Susan, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. May I start you off with something to drink?" James smiled inwardly but kept his expression neutral. "A glass of water would be fine, thank you." "Of course, I'll bring that right out," Susan replied with a professional nod before stepping away. When she returned with his water, her demeanor remained impeccable. "Here's your water, sir. Have you had a chance to look at the menu, or would you like some recommendations?" "I think I'll need a moment," James said. "But I'd like to ask, are you enjoying your work here?" The question seemed to catch her off guard, but Susan smiled genuinely. "I am, sir. I wasn't sure at first, but things have really turned around here. We have a great team now, and it feels good to be part of something that makes people happy." James nodded approvingly. "I'm glad to hear that." As the evening progressed, James watched Susan expertly manage her section. She checked in on guests regularly, offered thoughtful suggestions, and handled every detail with care. The transformation was remarkable, and James felt a quiet sense of pride. When he finished his meal, James asked for the manager. Richard appeared promptly, his demeanor respectful and polished. "Mr. Harrison," Richard said with a smile, "it's great to see you. I hope everything was to your satisfaction?" "It was excellent," James replied, "but I didn't just come here to enjoy a meal. I came to see how things are running, and I'm impressed. You've done well, Richard." Richard exhaled in relief, his gratitude evident. "Thank you, sir. It's been a journey, but the team has really come together. Everyone here understands the standards you set, and we're committed to maintaining them." James nodded. "And what about Susan? I noticed she's become quite the professional." "She has," Richard said with a grin. "She's one of our best now. Took the feedback to heart and really stepped up." James stood and approached Susan as she finished attending to another table. She looked surprised but pleased to see him. "Susan," James said, "I want to thank you for the excellent service tonight. Your growth and dedication are evident, and I'm proud of the progress you've made." Susan's cheeks flushed, and she smiled shyly. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. That means a lot coming from you. I've learned a lot these past months, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to grow." James extended his hand. "Keep up the good work, and you'll go far." She shook his hand, her grip firm. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." As James walked out of the restaurant that night, he paused to look back at the lively, thriving space. The transformation wasn't just about better food or service, it was about creating a culture of respect, care, and professionalism. The journey had started with a single moment of poor treatment, but it had culminated in something far greater: a thriving business and a team that took pride in their work. For James, this wasn't just a success. It was a reminder that real change happens when people are held accountable, given the tools to improve, and recognized for their efforts. And as the restaurant continued to shine, it stood as a testament to that principle.